It doesn't have to be this way. Hey, girl. Down on your luck. You get a podcast, you can still terrorize people. And no, I do not want to be on it.
It started like any other episode of The Daily Show, casual, sharp, and just a bit mischievous. But what happened next wasn't just comedy, it was a cultural moment that shook Meghan Markle's image in ways no headline ever could. Jon Stewart, back behind the desk, leaned into the camera and dropped a punchline so precise, so devastating, that it immediately split the internet in two. Meghan Markle, he smirked, pausing dramatically, is basically a mini Brigitte Macron, great at slapping her man into place. Laughter erupted in the studio, and just like that, a joke became something more. It wasn't just funny, it was a seismic shift. The crowd roared, the internet lit up with memes, and the carefully constructed aura around Meghan Markle began to crack. To understand the impact, you need to know the comparison. Brigitte Macron, the First Lady of France, is decades older than her husband, Emmanuel Macron, and often portrayed by European media as overly assertive and controlling. She's been caught on camera brushing off her husband's hand at a public event, a gesture that went viral for its perceived symbolism. Now, imagine Meghan Markle being cast in the same mold, not by a tabloid, not by a royal commentator, but by Jon Stewart, a man celebrated by progressives and liberals, not known for punching down. This wasn't random gossip. This was a segment, deliberately written, built to target every fault line in Meghan's public persona. And that's exactly why it landed so hard. Stewart didn't just roast a celebrity, he made a cultural observation, and audiences felt it. What came next was a media explosion. Within minutes, Twitter, or whatever we're calling it now, was ablaze. Memes popped up comparing Meghan to Brigitte. One viral post showed Prince Harry edited into that infamous Macron clip, awkwardly reaching for Meghan's hand as she waved him off. Captions ranged from boss babes or bossy babes to Duke of Disrespect. It was funny. Brutally funny. But underneath the humor was a growing consensus. Something about Meghan's image just doesn't sit right anymore. For years, Meghan Markle managed a delicate balance. She was both the victim and the rebel, both royalty and radical. Her brand straddled the line between empowerment and fragility, strength and sensitivity. But Stewart's joke, it tipped the scales. It knocked her off that careful tightrope and forced people to look again, and harder, and behind closed doors. Meghan was livid. Reports say her team went into full damage control. She found the bit not only sexist, but mean-spirited and deeply unfair. But the public didn't see it that way. What they saw was satire pulling the curtain back. And once the curtain's pulled, it's hard to unsee what's behind it. Her podcast, Confessions of a Female Founder, was supposed to be a masterstroke, a new era of authenticity, intelligence, empowerment. But instead, it became Exhibit A in the decline of her brand. Critics didn't mince words. The show was glossy, vague, repetitive. It avoided hard questions, skipped over real struggles, and offered little more than polished affirmations. Jon Stewart, with his usual wit, didn't let it slide. He quipped the show wasn't about female founders, it was about someone foundering. The crowd howled. Somewhere in Montecito, a PR assistant probably dropped their headset. But this wasn't just about one show. The truth is, Meghan's image has been quietly eroding for months. Failed projects, canceled deals, uncomfortable interviews. What was once seen as inspiring now feels overmanaged, overscripted, overdone. And that's where Jon Stewart's words really cut. Because he wasn't ranting, he wasn't foaming at the mouth like Piers Morgan or diving into conspiracy like certain YouTubers. He was calm, measured, smart, and funny. That's what makes it worse. Stewart represents the very crowd Meghan once captivated. Feminists, creatives, progressives. They were her people, but now they're the ones laughing. Not in a cruel way, but in a tired, almost relieved way. As if they were finally free to admit what they'd been whispering. Something feels off. Even worse, Prince Harry wasn't spared. Stewart skewered. Him too, joking about him being an unemployed immigrant who gave up everything and now carries Meghan's purse at charity events. Harsh? Maybe, but also visual. It painted an image that stuck. Harry, once the rebellious prince breaking free from tradition, now appears more like a background character in Meghan's story. His book Spare was meant to be a revelation, a personal triumph. But instead, it came across more like an overextended therapy session wrapped in tabloid drama. And now, Harry hardly speaks at public events. Meghan commands the stage. She delivers the lines, makes the pitches, poses for the camera. And Harry? He smiles and stands nearby, present but silent. It's no longer about royalty versus celebrity. It's about relevance, authenticity, and the feeling that what once looked like noble rebellion now seems more like curated chaos. And that's what makes satire dangerous. Not when it's wild or offensive, but when it's accurate. Stewart's bit worked not because it was mean. It wasn't. It worked because it was true. Or at least, it felt true. It echoed what audiences were already sensing but hadn't said out loud. This wasn't just a PR stumble. This was a full-on cultural reset. For Meghan and Harry, their post-royal narrative was always centered around control. Controlling their message, their branding, their version of the story. From glossy documentaries to carefully timed interviews, everything was curated to the last detail. But the more polished it became, the more people started to doubt its sincerity. Even the so-called candid moments began to feel staged. Paparazzi photos that looked too well-timed, surprise interviews that felt too rehearsed, and podcasts that sounded like sanitized TED Talks instead of real conversations. Jon Stewart didn't destroy Meghan Markle. He didn't have to. All he did was say what millions were already thinking, with a punchline that hit like a freight train. And now, Meghan faces the one challenge no PR agency can fix: irrelevance. What followed Jon Stewart's joke wasn't outrage. It was laughter. Not the kind of laughter that comes from malice, but the kind that comes from exhaustion of a public that's been sold a perfect story for too long. Meghan's brand has always relied on tight narrative control. Every move, every statement, every photograph felt choreographed. And for a while, it worked. She was the face of progress, of modern royalty. She challenged the system and walked, away with her head held high, but then the narrative started to wear thin. When every sentence sounds rehearsed, when every appearance feels calculated, people start to pull away. It's not that Meghan made some massive mistake. It's that her story stopped evolving. Instead of authenticity, the public got repetition. Instead of vulnerability, they got polish. And in a media landscape where authenticity is everything, polish feels like a lie. Jon Stewart didn't just mock Meghan. He shattered the illusion that she was still untouchable. He turned her from a figure of admiration into a punchline. And the scariest part? The public didn't defend her. They joined. And Harry didn't escape either. The image of him standing quietly behind Meghan, smiling and nodding, carrying her handbag, it's become meme-worthy. That visual did more damage to his reputation than 1,000 headlines. And when a visual becomes a joke, it sticks. It turns. Perception into fact. His memoir, Spare, was supposed to be his redemption arc. Instead, it was mocked for being overshared and emotionally indulgent. Instead of building sympathy, it raised eyebrows. Instead of elevating him, it shrank him. And now, in public, Harry seems unsure. Less a prince, more a +1. The irony? Meghan and Harry left the royal family in pursuit of authenticity. They wanted to live their truth, free from the constraints of the crown. But outside of the palace walls, their life started to look just as staged, if not more. Perfectly lit documentary scenes, orchestrated family photos, and podcast segments that felt like branded content. There was no messiness, no rawness, just production. And in entertainment, when you trade authenticity for image, you stop being a person. You become a product. Satire, especially sharp satire like Stewart's, has a way of exposing that. It doesn't just poke fun, it cuts through. The branding. It says what people are afraid to say, and Stewart said it with perfect comedic precision. He wasn't cruel. He was clinical, and that's what hit hardest. The fallout wasn't instant, but it was clear. Executives began to back away. Deals were quietly canceled. Projects that once carried her name were shelved. Not because Meghan did something terrible, but because the public stopped buying what she was selling. It wasn't hate. It was boredom. And boredom is the kiss of death in celebrity culture. Attention is the currency Meghan and Harry used to dominate. Now, the accounts are running dry. The audiences that once hung on every word are now scrolling past. They're not shouting. They're silent. And silence is worse than criticism, because when people are mad, they still care. But when they go quiet, They've moved on. Even Meghan's defenders have begun to fade. The usual excuses: she's being unfairly targeted, she's misunderstood, she's a victim of a biased media, no longer resonate. Not after Stewart. Because this wasn't Piers Morgan ranting. This wasn't some royal gossip blogger. This was Jon Stewart. Smart, respected, loved, and he laughed. That changes everything. The joke likening Meghan to a mini Macron wasn't pulled out of thin air. It was designed for maximum impact. It implied not just strength, but overreach. Not just partnership, but domination. And whether or not that's fair doesn't matter. What matters is that the audience believed it. And when people believe the joke, they stop believing the brand. The cultural moment passed in seconds, but the consequences are lasting. Meghan's team has tried to pivot. Rumors of new partnerships, media comebacks, charity initiatives. But every move now feels like damage control, like scrambling for a spotlight that no longer wants to shine on her. No matter how noble the cause or strategic the rollout, the public sees the performance, they feel the effort, and instead of admiration, they offer indifference. And Harry, he's become the symbol of someone who gave up everything for nothing. Once the rebel prince, now just a man in the background. He barely speaks, rarely leads, and always follows. That's the perception now. And in the world of media, perception is reality. Meghan and Harry once stood for something bigger. They were the couple who challenged a centuries-old institution. They symbolized modern values, interracial love, freedom from tradition. But now, stripped of mystique and buried under failed content, they've become something else entirely. Just another overexposed celebrity brand trying to stay relevant. Jon Stewart didn't ruin them. He revealed them. He held up a mirror and said, "This is what we see." And the audience, her audience, laughed in agreement. And that's what makes this moment different. It wasn't tabloids. It wasn't conservative backlash. It wasn't royal family interference. It was the people Meghan was trying to reach who turned away. Not with hate, not with anger, but with a shrug. The worst thing that can happen to a public figure is not being attacked. It's being ignored. And now, if Meghan wants to recover, she'll have to do something she's never truly done in public. Be real, be messy, be unscripted, drop the performance, drop the branding, drop the filters. But after years of narrative control, can she? Because in this world, where satire travels faster than sincerity, she may not get the time to try. If this shocked you, imagine what's coming next. The media tide is turning fast, and Meghan might not be ready for it. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens when the spotlight fades. Smash the like button if you think Jon Stewart just said what everyone else was too afraid to admit. And drop your thoughts in the comments. Is Meghan being unfairly targeted, or has the public finally seen through the branding?